Hello guys, we are group 7 and for today's presentation we're going to talk about The Happy Prince by Oscar Wilde. So I'm Asyiqin.
I'm Nazira.
I'm Alia.
And I am Nabila.
Okay, so we're going to get into it right away. Okay, the author's background. So Oscar Wilde is a famous Irish poet and playwright. He was born in Dublin, Ireland in year 1854. Wilde became the reviewer for the Pall Mall Gazette, then the editor of Woman's World from 1887 until 1889. It was during this year that he wrote The Happy Prince and Other Tales. So his other notable works included Lady Windermere Fan and The Importance of Being Earnest. In year 1895, Wilde was arrested after losing a case against the Marquis of Queensberry. He was arrested for committing act of gross indecency with certain male persons. At that time, homosexuality is classified as crime in England. He was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor and released from prison in 1897. Wilde then lived in France afterwards. He then wrote the Ballad of Ridingol, which is based on his experience in prison. Wilde died in 1900 because of meningitis. So the next one is going to be about the summary.
All right, so I'm going to continue with the summary. So this is a short story about a happy prince who was very happy in his life, and he also died very happily. He lives in his happy bubble, and he never let sorrows to enter the palace. However, after his death, he stood in the form of statue at the pedestal. He became a statue. He's a very beautiful statue, a very tall statue in the city, and his body is embedded with fine gold, with sapphires, with ruby all over. So people all over the city very love this statue, and it's very tall that from where the statues stand, he can see the whole city. So one night, there is a little swallow, a bird, flew over the city. He's actually separated with his flock, and he is on his way to the Egypt. All day long he flew, and at night time he arrived at the city. He is very tired and he wants to rest, so he decided to sleep at the prince's feet, the statue's feet. And then while he was trying to sleep, there's a few drops of water fell on him, and it's very annoying. And then he looked up at the prince, and he sees the prince is weeping, crying. And then he asked the prince, and the prince told him that from where he stands, he can see a very poor seamstress having needle marks all over her hands. And it's very sad because the seamstress son is very ill, and she has no money to buy medicine and also foods. So the happy prince asked for the swallow, the bird, the little bird, to take the ruby from his sword to give to the poor woman, to the poor seamstress, so that the poor woman can buy her son some oranges and medicine. So the swallow helped the prince, and then he put the ruby at the seamstress house. So next, the swallow wanted to go. The next day, the swallow wanted to go to Egypt with his friends, but then the prince requested for the swallow to stay for one more night, because the prince wanted to ask the swallow for help again. At that night, the prince told the swallow that there is a young man in a garret. He's trying to finish a play for the director, but then he's too cold to write anything, and he's very poor. He cannot buy wood to start fire, and he was also very hungry that it made him want to faint. And then the prince ordered the swallow to pluck one of the fire from his eyes to give it to the young man. Then the swallow did it, and now the prince is half blind. So the next day, once again, the swallow wanted to flew to the Egypt, and then the prince told the swallow to stay, because at the night time, he told the swallow that he can see a very poor match girl, and he wanted the swallow to help the poor match girl, and he ordered the swallow to take another one of his eye to give it to the poor girl. So now the prince is totally blind. Now that the prince is totally blind, he asked the swallow to fly all over the city and tell him what the swallow can see. So the swallow did it, and he told the prince that there is poor people everywhere, and the prince told the swallow to take off the golden leaves one by one for the poor. So after the swallow did that, the prince is now looking very dull, very ugly, and is not attractive anymore. So because of too much cold, the swallow did not flew to Egypt. It's too cold there, and the swallow died after kissing the prince, and the leaden heart of the prince broke into two pieces. And then a few days later, the mayor of the city ordered the statue to be pulled down and then to be melted into the furnace. But surprisingly, the molten heart of the leaden heart of the prince did not melt down. So the mayor decided to throw it away in a dust heap where the dead swallow was also lying. And then God sent his angel to bring two most precious things from the city, and the angel bring the swallow and also the heart of the happy prince. So this short story end with a very happy ending where the prince and the swallow are in the paradise. So next, Ellie for characters.
Okay, so for characters in the story, we have two major characters, which are the Happy Prince and the Swallow, and a few other minor characters. So the Happy Prince is a character which he used to live in a palace until he dies. As in the story, I lived in a palace where there was no sadness. A statue of himself is built and placed on a tall column high above the city. So in this excerpt, we can see that the Happy Prince actually lived in a palace. That after he dies, only then he realized how many misery that actually is happening in the city. And the next thing about Happy Prince is that he is admired by people. And so I quote, "He was very much admired indeed. He is as beautiful as a weathercock," remarked one of the town councillors who wished to gain a reputation for having artistic taste. And only not quite so useful, he added, fearing less people should think him unpractical, which he really was not. So this explains how he is actually very admired by people, because as we can see, why would people want to make you as a statue if you are not admired, right? So, and the next thing is the prince is looking for humanity and sacrificing his life to alleviate their pain. So in this excerpt that I take in the story is that actually the Happy Prince is describing how what he sees in is happening in the city. And for the highlighted part, it says, swallow, swallow, little swallow, will you not bring her the ruby out of my sword hilt? This explains the humanity that there is in Happy Prince, that he wants to bring the ruby from himself to give it to the little boy. So the next slide. Okay, so the next second protagonist in the story is the swallow. So he is a bird on his way to Egypt for the winter. His trip is delayed because of his temporary passion for a reed, foreshadowing to the thematic importance of love in the story. So as in the story, one night there flew over the city a little swallow. His friends had gone away to Egypt 6 weeks before, but he had stayed behind, for he was in love with the most beautiful reed. He had met her early in the spring as he was flying down the river after a big yellow moth, and had been so attracted by her slender waist that he had stopped to talk to her. So this explains how the swallow really wants to how his passion is for the reed. So the next thing about the swallow is that he is a polite bird. He said to the Happy Prince, no, he said to himself, "What is he not solid gold?" Said the swallow to himself. So this explains how he is a polite bird, that he didn't want to speak that out loud because he is scared that he will make the Happy Prince sad. So, and then the most important thing about the swallow is that he is the prince's messenger. But I will stay with you for one night and be your messenger. It is actually in the story that it is not only for one night. He waited to be the messenger of the Happy Prince for a few other nights also. So the next minor characters in the story, we have 6 minor characters, which are the reed, the town councillors, the poor woman, the young playwright, the little match girl, and the mayor. So the reed, she decides not to accompany the swallow, who has been courting her, and then she breaks his heart. She is too close to her home and cannot bear the thought of leaving, thus the swallow's courtship was in vain. So the next minor characters is the town councillors. They are greedy and obsessed with their public images. They cannot understand the humanity of the dead prince and of a little bird, but they are too busy in their daily pursuits to increase their money, rank, and power. The next minor characters is the poor woman. The poor woman has a son which is ill, so she is struggling to make money to take care of her son. But then she receives ruby from the happy prince. And then the young playwright is a starving and struggling man who is trying to complete a play, but he is unable to make the story done because he was unable to concentrate on the story because he was so hungry. But then he received a sapphire eye from the happy prince. And then the little match girl, she drops the matches that she is supposed to sell, but then she's crying because she was scared that she will get beat up by her father. Happy prince, knowing that, she gave the little match girl another his sapphire eyes. And then the last minor characters in the story is the mayor. He orders that the statue must be turned down, which is the statue of the happy prince, and then he wants the metal to be made into the statue of himself. Okay, next, Belle.
So the Happy Prince dwells upon the themes of love and sacrifice, inequality, and also true friendship. So the first one is love and sacrifice. After realizing the suffering of the human beings, the prince gives away all of his possession of jewelries like rubies, golds, and sapphires to show his compassion towards the common people, the poor people. Another example of love and sacrifice is when the swallow did not reach its true destination, which his journey has been delayed after falling in love with the reed. He decided to stay with the prince in the harsh cold weather to sacrifice and gives away the prince jewels. This great act of sacrifice, as the swallow knows that he won't survive the winter, proves the depth of his love and loyalty to the prince. The next themes is inequality. So the exploitation and hypocrisy of the ruling class of society in the story portrays as the presence of huge gap between the poor and the rich. This is between the happy prince, the mayor, the town councillors, and also the poor people. The first example of inequality in the story is when the mayor judged the statue looked ugly as it is not covered by gold and jewel anymore. So he decided to took it down. This shows the behavior of the mayor and the town councillor, who are very much interested only about their reputation, thus revealing their narcissism. So the beginning sets up the central themes of inequality because they were selfish and vain. They interested only in the aesthetic rather than the sufferings of their people. The second example of inequality is when the prince, back when he was alive, he lived happily. He was a happy person, lived in a huge palace. He doesn't know the miserable life of the poor beyond this huge wall. I quote from the story, the prince said that I did not know what tears were. I lived in a palace where there was no sadness. So this shows that the rich lived lavishly while the poor lived in a fear of catastrophe. Shows in the story where the prince lived happily, but his people suffers and faced with sorrows in their daily life. The third themes is true friendship. This theme shows when the prince shares a great bond of friendship and respect with the swallow. Whatever the prince commands to ask for help, the swallow follows the order religiously. Whenever the prince asks the swallow to deliver and present the jewelry to the poor people, the swallow will help him. And the friendship that they share was so pure and loyal that they were put in the heaven together in the end when both of them died. The next one is setting.
Okay, so for the setting in the story, we have time and place setting, occupation and daily manner setting, and emotional conditions and attitude setting. So for time and place, for place, it is high above the city, at the river, at the city, in the winter, between the feet of the happy prince, where the swallow is placed, and then in the palace of Sanssouci. And then the time is what it was 6 weeks after the swallow's friends moved to Egypt, so it was in the last summer. For occupation and daily manner setting, the happy prince is a statue, and his manner is that he was so happy and perfect that he never cries before when he was alive. And the swallow, he is a bird, and his manner is that he just wants to travel and to explore, and also helps to be the messenger of the happy prince. And then the town's councillor and the mayor, both of them decide that the statue is no longer beautiful and destroy it. This explains their manner as to be selfish person. And then the emotional conditions and attitudes. The happy prince, even though he was a statue, he still has good thought to help others. So he asks the swallow to become his messenger. And the last one is the swallow. Uh, he is a kind-hearted bird. He wants to be the messenger because he cannot bear seeing the prince was crying of the reality in the city. Okay, next, Belle.
So the plot structure begins with exposition of the story where there was a prince. The prince, he had everything in life. He never seen any sorrow. He is determined, however, to help the suffering of the people when he died and became a statue form, but he is immobile and can do nothing to help. I quote from the story, the prince said, "My feet are fastened to this pedestal and I cannot move." After that, the rising action happens when there are so many miseries that he saw. For example, the mistress who had no money, the playwright who was too poor, and also the match girl who got beat by her own father. But the prince couldn't do anything about it now that he's dead. So he asked the swallow to help him and became his messenger by giving all the jewelries on his statue to help the poor. And the swallow took pity on the prince and ready to assist him to ease the suffering of the people. So the seamstress received a ruby from the prince's sword. The playwright received sapphire from his eyes, from the prince's eyes, and the match girl got the other sapphire from his eyes, even though the swallow was not ready for the prince to be completely blind by it. And the climax happens when, after all the jewelries run out, the people seems to judge the statue ugly or no longer beautiful. After helping deliver all the jewelries, the swallow died because of the cold weather, and the happy prince, with no longer shining and beautiful jewelries, he looks like a beggar, according to the mayor, and eventually was melted down by the mayor and councillors' people. The happy prince's lead heart was also thrown away by them. The following action happens when God asked the angel to find both of them. And also the resolution happens when the angel brought back the merciful dead swallow and the lead heart of the happy prince. God was happy with both and said that now swallow can sing in the paradise garden forevermore, and the happy prince should be praised forever in the city of gold.
So for point of view, in this short story, the point of view that is used is third person omniscient. The pronouns he, her, and she are used in the story. The reason why this is third person omniscient is because the narrator knows all about the character's thoughts, including the feelings and emotion. So one of the examples is that, what is he not solid gold? Said the swallow to himself. He was too polite to make any personal remarks out loud. So in here, the narrator knows what the swallow was thinking at that time. Next, we're going to talk about the plot techniques. The first one is irony. The irony is the title because the title of the story is The Happy Prince, but the supposedly happy statue is in fact not happy at all. He used to be happy when he was alive, as he told the swallow that He had lived in a place where sorrow was not allowed to enter. However, now that he is a statue, all he could see is the misery of the poor citizens. And what saddened him even more is that he couldn't help them. So it is an irony for him to be called the Happy Prince, for the title to be the Happy Prince, when all that he feels is actually just sadness. And then the next plot technique is symbolism. The first one is the lead heart. So these lead hearts symbolize true love and compassion. Um, how it symbolizes compassion is because the statue prince mentions how, despite him having a heart made of lead, he can still feel sorrow from witnessing the misery of the city people. He also wants to help them because of the pity that he felt for them. And then for true love is when the swallow died, the prince's lead heart breaks into two. However, this lead heart can't be melted in the furnace, and eventually the lead heart and the dead bird, which are considered to be the two most precious things in the city by the god, are taken into heaven, where they are given eternal life. So it's considered true love because they are managed to be together until the end. And then the next symbolism is children. So Wilde used a lot of character of children in his tales, and this one included. Children in the Happy Prince represent innocence and goodness. So the Happy Prince mostly lent his help to the young people that are suffering. For example, he asked the swallow to give the seamstress the ruby because she had a sick son. He also asked the swallow to give the magic girl his sapphire eyes because the poor girl was afraid of being beaten up by his father. Now, the children all are innocent beings, yet in this story, they are all suffering. So, this lead the statue of Prince to help them by giving them the precious jewels. And then the last symbolism is the swallow. The swallow in this story symbolizes loyalty. In the beginning of the story, the swallow is shown to be in love with the reed. Despite other swallows criticizing him of being foolish for loving a reed that has no money and many relationships, the swallow still remains loyal to his love. He eventually left the reed because he was upset that the reed was reluctant to live with him to Egypt and accusing the reed as trifling with him. When he meets the statue of Happy Prince, he gradually fell in love with the prince. He remains loyal to the statue until the end of the story, helping him to save the children during the cold season, fully knowing that he will eventually die because of the cold. And last but not least of plot technique is the personification, which are the swallow and the happy prince. So these two things are non-human, sorry. However, Oscar Wilde personified them as human in the story. They talk to each other, they feel emotions and feeling and reacted to it like human does. For example, the happy prince pity and lament the poor citizen who suffers, yet being ignored by other human beings, the rich people. So because he pity them, he then helps the poor with the assist from the swallow. So for the next part, will be continued by Ellie.
Okay, so for language style, we have the question-like sentence in the story. While use many sentence like this, as for example, a mother said to her little boy who was crying for the moon. The mother is asking for is asking her son, why can't you be like the happy prince? And then also a question the swallow asking to the reed, will you come away with me? And then the next style of Wilde's writing in the story is that imperative sentence. So as we all know, imperative sentence is used to give commands or ask questions or give warnings, advices, and all that. So the happy prince are saying, the happy prince is saying to the swallow, 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 little swallow, will you not bring her the ruby out of my sword hilt? And another example is that, will you not stay with me for one more night and be my messenger? So a lot of imperative sentence are used in Wilde's style of writing in the story. Next is uh, known as previously exclamation sentence. So exclamation sentence is basically a sentence which have an exclamation mark. So as for example, a beautiful girl said to her lover at the balcony, and how wonderful is the power of love. And then the two little boys who are crying when they receive the gift from Happy Prince, we have bread now. And then a declarative sentence is a sentence which want to declare something. So the Happy Prince is declaring that he is covered with gold. So in the story, I am covered with fine gold. And then he also declared that he did not know what tears were, for I live in the palace of Sanssouci, where sorrow is not allowed to enter. So another style of Wilde writing in the story is that, next slide, is that he uses a lot of complex sentences in this story. So this story has been written in simple mode, but Wilde has written so many complex lines in the story. As for example, when the Happy Prince said that, "And now that I am dead, they have set me up here so high that I can see all the ugliness and all the misery of my city. And though my heart is made of lead, yet I cannot choose but weep." So the next example is that the swallow said to the Happy Prince, "But I feel quite warm now, although it is so cold." As we all know, as the settings in the story is that it is during winter, so supposedly the swallow is supposedly to feel cold, but he feels warm from the relationship that he has with the Happy Prince. Okay, so next, message and values.
All right, so I'll be sharing the message and values in the story. So The Happy Prince is a tale with multiple lessons, but one of the dominant messages is appearances can be deceptive. So all things might seem grand, but when the outer beauty came off, what matters is the inner and grace of beauty. This shows in the story when the statue was all grand, covered in gold leaves, rubies, and sapphire. But what matters is the lead heart, not the goals. Outward beauty doesn't mean a lot. Physical beauty is very superficial. The real beauty is in the person's heart, which have the deep feelings and the ability to feel the sorrow and hardship of others. And other things that associated with appearances can be deceptive is when we are able to take action and helps others suffering of human being like the prince. He was happy when he's alive and enjoy all of his companionship, but when he's dead, he saw the suffering of the people of his people. He was saddened by them, and then he was kept in a palace surrounded by beauty and luxury and pleasure. So he never knew what life was like for the average person. So he felt this responsibility and compassion to help others, to take action for his people. We can see that this earthly pleasure might disappear, but action undertaken out of compassion lasts. And the next main lesson from the story is the moral significance of sacrifice. So there will be good rewards to those who feel for the poor and unfortunate and make action out of it by helping to remove the miseries and suffering of other people. So when you are rich, you have gold and rubies and such. Those things get meanings when you help people who suffers. So the benefits of sacrifice can, of course, happen accidentally or unforeseeable. You didn't see it coming to you, but they sometimes can be foreseeable. Sometimes when we help others without, we didn't think of anything in return, but in some mysterious way, we'll eventually get tons of benefits in life, right? So people who put themselves on the line for the greater good for others are very inspiring and important. So the next one is social criticism.
All right. Last but not least, I'm going to elaborate on the social criticism. The social criticism that we can find in the short story is rich versus poor. So the Happy Prince is actually an allegory and metaphor of the British social system, where the poor is left to starve to death, living in poverty, while the rich is drowned in money. Like people say, poor stay poor, rich become richer. Oscar Wilde addresses the issue of social injustice and critiques on the society that can be cruel and heartless. So, as we can see, the prince is sacrificing himself, giving his all in order to help the poor and If you guys did not notice, actually all the people that the prince and the swallow help is actually the victims of highly capitalist society. When we go through one by one, for example, the seamstress, she's actually a very hardworking woman that is not appreciated by the wealthy middle class girl. For example, the bird, when he flew over the city to give the seamstress a ruby, he heard a girl from the palace say that the seamstress is lazy, so that's not good. And second, the playwright is actually an appreciated writer that is not appreciated by the city. And lastly, the poor match girl, she's actually a child that is exploited by his own father. Throughout the story, we can see that the prince tries to help the poor people with precious gifts, his ruby, his sapphire, his gold leaf, everything he has. Yet his private altruistic activities did not make any difference to the society in terms of the economic establishment. So there's also people saying that the Happy Prince actually deserve what he faced as a statue, weeping, crying, and everything. Because while he was living, he is unaware and he did not do his job as a prince to help his people. So after he died, he's being punished for lacking in responsibilities while he is alive. So I think that's all for our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.